out with weapon drawn and placed him under arrest. The first thing he did was to pull off Pickard's wedding ring. 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole, the verdict later read. Leonard Pickard had never raised a hand against another. He hadn't stolen anything or harassed anyone. All he'd done was manufacture a substance that half a century earlier had been considered the most promising pharmaceutical development of all time, a quality product made by the Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz. But in the years since then, something had happened with LSD. It had been knocked off course, had been misunderstood and misused, and had fallen into the disreputable category of prohibited drugs that a United States official named Harry J. Anslinger, head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, had created almost single-handedly after the Second World War. Over the years, friends and supporters spoke out in support of Pickard, and in the depths of the coronavirus pandemic, the unexpected occurred. A judge granted a compassionate release, and just like that, after more than 20 years behind bars, he found himself a free man. Leonard Pickard's unexpected release can be seen as symbolic of a broader reversal within society with regard to the treatment of LSD. Pickard, who was once judged so dangerous that the law wanted him locked away in a high-security prison for the rest of his life, now serves as a scientific advisor to a fund that targets opportunities at the intersection of psychedelics and technology, hoping to identify the pharmaceutical giants of tomorrow. He also advises international corporations and universities on the development of psychedelic medicines. Every morning, from 6 to 9, he studies the latest publications coming out of research institutions around the globe. The early history of LSD would always have been fascinating, but in the current moment it seems especially relevant. A specter looms over the world, the specter of legalization. More and more governments are beginning to rely on scientific knowledge rather than bow to the ideological demands of the Cold War. I myself became curious about the drug when my father, a retired judge, started to consider giving microdoses of LSD to my mother to treat her Alzheimer's disease. He had asked me why, if the drug was actually supposed to help, he couldn't just get it at the pharmacy. This launched me on my research. The more I dug into the history, the more fascinated I became. I began to see how much of the early history of LSD was shaped by the shadow that lies over the molecule, a result of the personal connection between a Swiss pharmaceutical CEO named Arthur Stoll, a kind of unwilling forefather of psychedelics, and Richard Kuhn, the leading biochemist for the Third Reich. This relationship aided the National Socialists, who were beginning to study the use of psychedelics as potential truth drugs, questionable research which, after the war, sparked the interest of the U.S. military and its intelligence agencies in these substances. This book is what emerged from my curiosity. In this moment when, after many decades, we are finally reconsidering the nature of our laws surrounding psychedelics, it feels more important than ever to look backward and understand how we arrived at those regulations in the first place. The fact that the U.S. government was introduced to LSD through Nazi research shaped much of the federal government's early attitudes around it and other psychedelics. Once the Nazis elicited a potential weaponized use for LSD, the drug was never able to shake that taint. An entire class of medicines with the potential to help treat diseases that otherwise are essentially incurable was caught between the collapsing Nazi regime and the early stirrings of the Cold War, and saw its early promise shattered. In addition to LSD's militarized misconception from the Nazis, there were other areas of U.S. drug policy influenced by the Third Reich. In fact, the eventual prohibition of all drugs, including psychedelics, can be traced back to Hitler's Germany, where the Nazi approach to banning drugs, their so-called Rauschgiftbekämpfung, or fight against narcotics, the forerunner to the war on drugs, also inspired U.S. prohibition policy. Indeed, it was a U.S.